Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's session of the Clinical Discussion Forum. We will be covering three key topics related to the planning and execution of the clinical trials today. First one is going to be where to start when planning your clinical trial. The second topic is how to select the right clinical site or sites, and how to choose the right eCRF EDC system. My name is Artūras Pažera. I'm the Senior Project Manager at Biomapas. I've been with Biomapas for the last 6 years, focusing primarily on early phase development for our biotech sponsors. And I'm very pleased to introduce today's guest speaker, Jean Luc Béjot. Jean Luc brings more than 35 years of international experience in clinical development, in clinical operations and medical affairs within the life science industry. His core expertise lies in early phase clinical development with a strong focus on biotechnology and advanced therapy medicinal products. Currently working as independent consultant, Jean Luc provides clinical and medical support to sponsors across clinical development and operations. So thank you very much for joining us today, Jean Luc.
Well, thank you, Artūras. It's a pleasure to share my experience in all these topics with you and your audience.
Thanks. So let's dive into our first topic. When planning an early phase oncology trial, where should sponsors and especially small biotech start? Jean-Luc, could you please share your perspective on the key starting points and some strategic considerations for early planning?
Yes, well, to start with stating the obvious, I think the first consideration is to determine what should be the objective of this early phase study. Typically, when we talk about phase 1 studies in patients in oncology, of course, usually, the main objective is to establish the recommended dose and schedule for the continued development with phase 2 and phase 3 studies. And the guiding principle here should be that you should limit unnecessary exposure to subtherapeutic dose for the patient. You, of course, need also to preserve the patient's safety, which means some caution when reaching higher dose. And of course, it's to optimize the patient accrual to allow quicker clinical development. So these are the main guiding principles. Then if we go a bit further, the study design should also be thought. And here you need to consider, of course, the type of product or the product. You won't design the study the same way if you have monoclonal antibody, for example, a vaccine, or a cell and gene therapy. So this will drive usually the study design based on what you can do in terms of dose escalation, dose finding, and dose schedule. The last point is also what kind of indication you will target in your study. What I mean by that is, especially when you have a product, the development of which will be driven by the mechanism of action, you may want at this early stage to select a few or several type of cancers that you will target. So you have to factor in all these aspects to start designing your clinical study protocol.
Okay, so let's go into the second topic. How should sponsors approach selecting the right clinical sites? What is the main criteria to consider? And maybe there are some special items to consider when we speak about early phase oncology.
There are several criteria that you may need to factor in to select the right site or sites, depending on the size of your study. I mean, some points to consider is usually the companies have already some key opinion leaders or experts that they have been working with. And these might be a first step to select the site, either choosing these experts or relying on the network of these experts. A second point to consider is depending on the design of the study, and more particularly the need to draw and process either pharmacokinetic or biomarker samples. you may need to have a phase one facility that is well equipped for this kind of measurements. And having also the necessary resources in terms of nursing, for example, to take the samples, process them, and have them analyzed properly. Another point to consider is sometimes from experience, we know that well-renowned experts are not necessarily the highest recruiters. And I don't want to point any fingers in saying that, but this is reality. So you have to carefully weigh the balance between well-known investigators and the recruitment potential. The last point, which is already approached earlier, is the selection of the site itself. Beyond the sample issue that I mentioned, you also have to consider the equipment of the site, their experience in terms of phase one study. I know, for example, that in France, you have anti-cancer centers all across the country, and some of them have specialized phase one units. So you really need to consider that, especially when you have some specific measurements, once again, that need to be done.
Thank you, Jean Luc. From my side, I think one of the things which we see, and especially it might be relevant to the small biotechs, is that sometimes it is assumed that in all countries performing a phase one or first in human trial, the clinical site needs to be accredited by the national authorities. And this is true in quite a few countries. However, there is also quite a few countries where this is not needed. And a phase one trial could be done in a university, big hospital, where they are not, accredited especially for that, but they really have a separate department who does that, and the phase one trials can really successfully be run there as well.
Yes, that's a very good point, Artūras. Thank you. And another point that I would like to mention also is, depending on the specificities of the product, you may have to select some very specialized sites. What I mean by that is when you're using, for example, cell or gene therapy, or even sometimes vaccines, you need to have a very specialized phase one unit that is allowed to handle the patient and the samples and the safety precautions that needs to be taken around such type of therapies.
So finally, let's talk about the last topic. How do you choose the right eCRF or EDC system when you are a sponsor? What are the main factors to keep in mind? And again, if we speak mainly about the small studies for the early phase.
Well, that's always a challenge. I don't know if there is the best EDC system to choose, but there are definitely some points to consider when selecting this EDC system with a CRO. In my experience, the very large and well-known EDC systems are usually not the optimal choice for small-scale studies, especially phase one studies, for several reasons. First, some of them require some significant training from the sites. And when you're doing a phase one oncology study, maybe you have other things in mind than just focusing on training. You want to focus on patient care and data entry. So it may not be the optimal type of EDC. The second thing is very often from experience in early phase studies, you amend the protocol one or several times. And the consequence of that is you need to have an EDC system that is flexible enough so that it doesn't take months to implement changes in the protocol for data recording. And then, of course, the one point that is sometimes forgotten is the easiness and the flexibility of use for the users, which are usually the study coordinators as well as the investigators when they have to review and sign the pages. So there should be here considered the user friendliness of the system. So this is not really an advice on choosing this or that system. It's more some points to consider to make sure that you have a system that is adapted to your study and your environment.
Right. And I think just to add from my side, of course, flexibility is very important. But I think that specific data management professionals need to be chosen because with flexibility, there also needs to be a good control, right? I do agree that sometimes the big system serves the big study purposes, and usually bigger teams are involved and more specialists. For the smaller studies, the more flexible eCRF system is really a benefit, as also because you mentioned unavoidable protocol amendments and updates to the system, but there also needs to be a good quality control on updates made to keep the data reliable.
Yeah, and from the operational point of view, there is also the cost that needs to be considered. The big system have very often a high maintenance fee or user fees. So for a small biotech with a limited budget, it may also be a factor that can be taken into consideration to select a less expensive system.
Yeah, right. Thank you, Jean Luc.
You're welcome.